welcome to this Thursday's episode of the 905 Roundup with me, Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And we've got a couple of stories that certainly affect the 905 region, and the first one probably affects more people than almost anything else, and that is house prices. And for the first time in a long time, house prices in the 905 region are dropping and dropping significantly, it seems.
Yeah,
Joel, you've been following what's going on.
yeah. Well, it's you can't not pay attention to it nowadays because if you follow any real estate agent online, which everyone does nowadays, most of them will point out that there used to be houses going for $1 million that are now being sold, for 800,000. Is it a huge drop? No, but it's something that I think people should be cognizant of. Now, I mean, this isn't surprising. I mean, this isn't something like, oh my gosh, it's an emergency, but um, we're starting to see the kind of the economy's kind of getting back back level. I guess is the best way to phrase it. I mean, it all started when the Bank of Canada started raising interest rates. So now we're at, I believe, 2% interest rates for the Bank of Canada, which of course means that our, I mean, what I think I'm concerned about with all that is as housing prices start to fall, the idea is, well, some of the if you bought a house recently, you might be sitting on a lemon, unfortunately, which could be a huge problem, especially if you're one of these people who bought it for, oh, it's going to be my retirement nest egg. I'll a nice little summer getaway. I'll rent it out and make a little profit and then flip it. You might be sitting on a lemon now, which is a scary proposition for people who are overextended in their loans.
Well, you'd certainly be feeling irritated that you bought it exactly the wrong moment. And I mean, I guess the worst that happens is you can't sell for a year or so. I mean, hopefully we're not looking at some a fundamental collapse, but more a
I don't think it's going to be like a 2008 reboot that we saw, but I definitely think that we're with interest rates rising. I mean, and the other thing was the Bank of Canada predicting that in 5 years' time, when people start to renew those mortgage rates, they're all of a sudden going to say, "Well, I can't afford the mortgage on that $1 million loan that I took out last year or the year before." Um, that's it. That's good. I mean, these are big questions, and especially in the 905, that's you just know there's a lot of people who are looking at that news and saying, "Oh my God, what am I going to do in 5 years, or maybe even next year?"
yeah. I mean, it's bad for sellers. I mean, I guess all you can say is the sellers have had it in their favor for a long time. I guess maybe this is one way to solve the
Yeah,
affordability
maybe.
crisis. Um, I mean, we've been saying. I mean, we've just come through a historically very unusual and extremely long period of low interest rates that's gone on for most of the last 20 years. I think when my parents bought a house back in the sort of
Yeah.
70s and 80s, they were looking at interest rates of over 10%, which seems inconceivable now. But then they also bought a house for £4,000.
Well,
so,
yeah.
so different world, different times.
Well, I mean, that's isn't it, like, if you think about it, though, that we're talking about people who bought $1 million homes on, in some cases, maybe less than 1% interest rates, and all of a sudden those interest rates are going to climb. I don't think that this is the end of the interest rates going up. I think there's still room that the Bank of Canada is willing to raise those rates over the next few months, maybe even next year. Um, that that's one of those things. I mean, I don't want to sound cause for alarm, but yeah, I mean, this isn't an apples to apples situation. This is a lot of people heavily in debt, and all of a sudden those bills are going to be called due really, really soon.
Yeah, yep, yep. Well, and we have actually it kind of interest rates going up is fine if wages go up in line with inflation, and that's the question. We have the province currently still trying to lock in public sector workers as if the change in the inflation rate hasn't happened, and you know yeah if your wages going up in a similar way, then what you can afford will stay the same, and in fact, if prices are coming down a bit, that could be a good thing for a lot of people. But it's yeah, for those people who've owned houses for a whole bunch of years, and kind of the temptation to just assume that this is going to go on forever is strong, and
When times are good, people don't want to think about when they're going to end,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
What I get out of this most is, again, I mean, I'm not an economist by trade, so a lot of this is I'm going by what other people have written and what I read in the papers. But what I worry about is the political um, analysis, because we're going to see there's going to be, over the next 4 years, for certainly, we're going to see a lot of people nervous, really scared, and a lot of people possibly losing a large part of their nest eggs going forward. I'm not seeing a lot of action definitely at the provincial level, not clear at the federal level either, in terms of actions to help people navigate through this. Because you know, let's go with the federal Liberals. I don't really see any plans to help them help people go through this. There's maybe there will be, maybe they're keeping an eye on it. They're waiting for the right time to do a little plan. Who knows? Lord knows they've done it in the past. We saw the last 2 years. They can act quickly when need be. Maybe that's what's going to happen. What I'm concerned about is you get people like Pierre Poilievre in Ottawa saying, "Oh, we should all switch over to Bitcoin. That's going to solve all of our inflationary problems and whatnot." And I say, we need real, we need real solutions to these very real problems, not this malarkey and hokiness that's coming out.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a man with no apparent moral compass or compunction about being a lying piece of shit. And I mean, he's there blaming the federal government for inflation that is affecting
Yep.
the entire globe. We've just come through the biggest kind of upheaval since the Second World War, uh, I guess, and whether we've come through it, I don't know. But we're navigating it,
Yeah.
and that was something big enough to change the kind of economic certainties that we've been dealing with since the 90s, really, where for whatever reason inflation ceased to be a problem for about 30 years. Perhaps it will go back to ceasing to be a problem. I mean, the argument was that you know the way in which technology is continually dropping in price, because as technology comes along, it starts
Right.
off expensive, it gets cheaper and cheaper, is a kind of counter-inflationary thing that just came to dominate our economy and counter other things that would go up in price. You kind of feel like, well, technology hasn't gone away, so why all of a sudden its prices? I mean, you just feel it's just, well, the cost of transporting things, the cost of goods to market, and
Well,
getting employees to actually want to risk their lives to go to work. It has added a whole lot of costs, and therefore we're seeing an adjustment. So it could be a good adjustment. I mean, I say that gritting my teeth, as someone who, like many people, has an interest in house prices.
well, I mean, it's not, I guess I look at it again as every crisis is a moment for opportunity, right? And that's, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I just the falling housing prices are going to help. But here's a question: as housing prices continue to fall, continue to plummet, um, I have no idea what the answer to this question would be, but how do you think that's going to affect Doug Ford's plan to build? Because I mean, if you think about it, the incentive to build those sprawling subdivisions that we know all of his developer buddies are itching to do, and when the price of a simple detached house for four was going for 1 million, 1.2 on the open market. Now it's looking at 800, and that price is going to continue to fall. Do you think that that incentive or that that drive to build is going to be there at the moment?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, you have to reckon that. I mean, house prices are ultimately, much as people talk about supply and demand, the prices have not been entirely connect. I mean, they're related to demand, but they're not directly connected to demand, and they're certainly not connected to the bricks and mortar it costs to build a house don't cost three times what they
Right.
did 10 years ago, but the house might be three times what it was worth 10 years ago. So you've got to reckon there's an awful lot. If you're a builder, that there's a lot of prices have got to drop a hell of a long way before you start losing money on a development. But then again, I suppose it depends on how much they paid for
Well,
the land in the first
but
place.
here's the thing. Here's the thinking about it. Okay, so how much do they pay for the land? Secondly, the cost inflation is forcing the cost of goods. I mean, just the fact that it costs us now $2 a liter, $2, 2.10, 2.15, maybe even 2.20, depending on where you are in the country, to fill up to get your car. That's all going to be reflected in the price of goods. I mean, that's the price of building materials is going to go up. Everything is going up. So it's not even a matter of whether, the plan to build and just to throw it open to the developers to build things, and that's going to solve our housing supply crisis. I think this throws a wrench in it because your inflation is going to your cost of goods is going to go up considerably over the next few years, and if the going rate of buying a house continues to plummet, that profit margin just shrinks. It's considerably shrinking. Is the incentive there for, if I was a developer, to go and say, well, yeah, I'm going to go pick a fight with cities to go, I'm going to go put in my plan for development, and when the city says no, we're going to ban it. Okay, I want to go the old OLT and to fight it out there. If the process is still going to take 2 or 3 years to do it, I wonder if somebody's sitting there doing the math saying, geez, that the incentive just isn't there anymore. We can't wait it out. We need to build now when we know what the price of building a house is going to be, not what it could be in a year's time.
That, or I think probably what tends to happen in these things is that the land that was purchased at disadvantageous rates, that now have made a development kind of what you end up is them sitting on land for 10 years waiting
Right.
for the price to come back up. So I don't think it's so much that they can't rush any more than are already rushing, I don't think, but that you end up with empty lots, and developers already show absolutely no compunction about buying a property, letting it sit as a ruin in the center of a city for 10 years
Right.
until they get the right moment to build. I mean, it already happens, and it will happen more, and there's nothing really. It seems that there's no way to stop them doing that kind of thing. I mean, again, it doesn't help with uh, affordability, or it can be a real problem, for cities that suddenly have. I mean, kind of this is Hamilton's problem.
Right.
All those parking lots are owned by
Right.
people, and those people are generally developers, and they're just waiting for the moment when they can stick something on that parking lot. But now is not the time that they want to build it.
And I guess that's kind of the problem with this, oh, we'll let the market figure it out approach that the current government seems to be taking. At some point, you know I mean, the carrot and the stick, I guess, is only good so much, that you have to tell them, like, no, or you raise your tax on those vacant lots, and all of a sudden, all that now now there's an incentive to build there.
Yeah,
Um,
or at least open them up to rental accommodation or something. While
yeah,
while if if you're going to sit on a piece of land, do nothing with it, then well,
I,
you can't do that. You need to do something to make it of use, or again, taking a hold of some heritage building or something like that and just letting it rot away for a decade or so until it falls down on its own or whatever.
right.
These are all the tricks that you use to get the building you want, because when you're dealing with however many millions, or waiting 5 years isn't really that much of a problem.
Well, it's just we've talked about it, like, not, and we're not talking about just housing affordability. We're talking about just decent housing for the lower class. Like the homeless to have something that they can afford to move into, and whatnot. This is we've talked a million times on this podcast, so it's nothing new. It's just, this is something we've been paying attention to, and I don't see right now the current policies being put forward at both the federal and the provincial level aren't really addressing uh, the housing crisis as it is. I just see that the current economic status is just going to exacerbate the problem and make a bad situation really, really worse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if both are ultimately, I mean, the federal government has put serious money into just actually building stuff, so it's only fair we recognise that.
Right. Yeah.
However, if ultimately the Canadian solution to housing is to let builders build according to market and according to demand, then we're going to be stuck with the same problem, and it's again the crisis is a crisis of affordability for lower middle class,
Mm-hmm.
working class people, average people not being able to buy or live in many cities, certainly in the 905, because simply can't afford it. Um, Nothing's really being done to address that, and again, because I think because for whatever reason in this country we never consider using government, the strength that government has to leverage property building, and again, I don't know how many times I've said it, but the market doesn't build affordable housing; it builds slums. So we, if we want affordable housing, we have to build it ourselves. Is what I keep on coming back to, and in a period of economic contraction, that's exactly the kind of project that governments are supposed to. I mean, basically, we saw it with a certain left-wing socialist called Stephen Harper when he went on a spending spree to kind of spend us out of recession.
Yeah.
Now he put that money into roads and whatever,
Signs.
blue signs all over the country. But and actually that was a liberal policy that he stole somewhat against his will, but it worked for him. And the but another building project that a government of whatever political stripe you get into is well, rather than building a couple of highways, which we don't need, um, you know, affordable housing projects, and affordable housing projects earn money.
Yeah.
They're not money down the drain. This is not giving money away permanently. It's like, no, this is, you're just becoming a landlord, but the government has the money
Yeah.
to be that landlord.
You know what? Why don't we leave the first half on that note? Because I think that ties into what we're going to talk about right after the break, which will be just after this. And we're back. While we talked about all the problems that are going to be facing us over the next, well, at least 4 years, we expect, due to the economy, what we're going to talk about is, well, I guess it's a fair chance now that we can, after the provincial election, we can kind of do kind of a post mortem. Is that the right phrase to say
Yeah,
that?
well, yeah,
Because
certainly there was a death.
it wasn't even so much a death; it's much like you kicked the dead body. Um, well, I mean, like everybody else is doing it on the liberal dismal performance in the last election. So Why do, Lord knows you have two ex-liberals on the podcast right here. Why don't we take a crack at it? And Lord knows if any liberals are listening to us, listen to what we have to say, because this is actually probably smarter than what you were told going into the election.
Well, yeah, I mean, I noticed that the CBC had an argument, not an argument, an article the other day. Ontario Liberals start soul searching after second devastating election loss. And yeah, absolutely. And halfway down that, it's Mike Crawley who does an awful lot of these kind of articles. And about halfway down that article was a quote from Jeff Lehman, who's the former mayor of Barrie, I think.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
and former liberal candidate for Barrie.
Yeah, came close but no cigar. Within about 900 votes of winning that seat, which was and Barrie was a Liberal seat as recently as 2018, but it last won it in 2014, I believe, when it was turned Liberal for kind of the first time in a long time. I think it was one of those ridings that had been kind of 70 years in PC hands or something like that.
Yeah.
But his quote, anyway, was that, let me just read out what he said, and then I'll tell you why I think it's wrong. Our challenge now is to restore Ontarians' faith in that centrism, liberal centrism, he's saying, in that fiscal responsibility to be able to speak to the importance of the economy as we speak to the importance of social progress. Lehman said this on TVO's Agenda with Steve Paikin. And I think, I kind of read that and said, hang on a minute, I was at the leadership the convention that chose Stephen Del Duca, and Stephen Del Duca was the right-wing choice. I mean, everybody was like, what we need, and right. I didn't agree with it at the time, still don't agree with it, and I currently feel extremely vindicated in that belief that going right was the wrong thing to do, because it's like, across the world, across Canada and across the world, the Conservative parties poll between 33 and 43% of the vote. Right. So on a really good day, they'll get to 43, and on a really bad day, they'll go down to about 33. So sure, there's 10% of votes at an absolute maximum that might go to other parties. I just don't see the evidence in the current climate that Conservative votes really move very much. So, but the good news is that vote is well below 50% needed for a majority of voters. The votes that move are all on the progressive side, with the kind of, pretty much fixed 60 to 70% of people who vote for progressive parties at every single election. So I just don't understand this. Oh no, we're too left wing. Like, no, Stephen Del Duca did not lose because he was too left wing. My God, that wasn't the reason. No. He lost because he was completely uninspiring, uninteresting, and just didn't, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude to the guy, but he did not grab the imagination of anybody very much. No.
Well, I mean, if you've seen people who started plowing through the numbers of the turnout, which was the lowest in the history of Ontario, but the right now, like, you're just saying about 17% of all eligible electors, people who are able to vote, 17% of them voted for the Conservatives, which is abysmal. And when you think of, like, that's how many people were like that's how many people who are active, like, I'm going to come out and vote for my team. Only 17% supported the Tories. So you think about, like, 83%, 83% are left wide open of either they're apathetic. I would argue they were mostly apathetic to their choices. Now, I mean, when after the election, I was confused, because if you remember, leading up to for the 2 years of the pandemic, Doug Ford was not praised. Like, every time that man stood to the microphone, the next day people were vilifying him and just saying, this is bona fide. And we were going from one day, oh yeah, we need to go, everything's fine. We're going to make it through. And then the next day, you had Stephen Lecce come up say, "Oh no, I got to close down all the schools. We're going to virtual learning because numbers all of a sudden spiked." And it's like, it's just wishy washy, kind of wherever the wind blew. And now people are like, this isn't leadership. And I was sitting there puzzling my head. I was sitting there going, why is it that we're giving this man another 4 years? And I was asking around on the interwebs, social media. It is good for something other than yelling at people that you disagree with. But this time I said I want to reach out to the people that you may not be liberal or NDP, but if you voted for Doug Ford, I definitely want to know why. And I was reaching out to ask, and the general consensus was that not an enthusiastic, yeah, Doug Ford's great. It was the other guys just sucked. The other guys did not talk about anything that mattered to me. At least with Doug Ford, I know what I'm getting. But and one thing I kept, and I was glad to see I was vindicated on this one. That buck a ride promise, what people saw through that like a window. It was, people knew you couldn't afford it. People knew it was a gimmick. People knew, how do you make fun of Doug Ford for a buck of beer and then you come back with buck a ride? It was just tacky and bad policy, bad planning, bad platform all around. And that's what only people remembered. You and I sat down, we went through the liberal platform in detail. We said there were some good things in it. There were things that we liked about it. Things that we thought, why aren't they focusing more on this? That buck a ride was the thing that everybody listened to. And people said, like, you're a joke. You're not taking my concerns or the needs of my family, my livelihood seriously. And that was the general consensus that I got of it, was that people were like, this, it's kind of a pox on all your houses. Nobody listens to what the needs of actual Ontarians are. And that's not to say Doug Ford did.
And the dangerous thing is that there seems to be a discussion we have after every election, federal, provincial, regardless, and kind of regardless of who wins. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to say that either of us would prefer to see any party but the Conservatives win federally. But still, the last couple of federal elections have been miserable affairs.
Yeah.
When nobody, apart from, I guess, a few MPPs, really woke up the next day feeling good about it. You may have felt some relief that it wasn't worse, but you didn't feel like, oh, this is great, this is a new day for, and I guess that doesn't come along that often, maybe, but I feel that the level of I still feel like the politicians are underestimating the sheer level of disenchantment and frustration with the whole political process from top to bottom, even while they see millions of people staying at home is just the tip of the iceberg. But as you see the increase in radicalism and extremism, that the Liberal parties, and to an extent the NDP, have lost their working class credentials. We see, not just one, but several major unions now siding with the PCs. I mean, I think that's appalling, and the unions should be ashamed of themselves, and they're a disgrace, but, and so should the other guys. But nevertheless, it says something about the how working class movements of various kinds have just lost all faith with the parties that meant to represent them. And I think, you can look at history and see the examples of this happening. And, the place where this kind of thing happened before was, I know it's a cliche, but it was 1930s Germany where the middle of the road moderate guys of the Weimar Republic just bored everybody to tears, and everybody went and joined the communists or the Nazis. I mean, I'm simplifying and I'm exaggerating somewhat, but there are really elements of this, and I think with the rise of extremism that we're seeing in really repugnant and vile kind of political movements we're seeing in North America and across the world, is partly down to that collapse of faith in democracy to deliver for people. And that doesn't excuse the right-wing nut jobs.
no, it
and well, the
doesn't.
extremists of whatever side of the equation they come
But
from.
it
But
it's
it does say something about it.
but I mean, let's face it. Like we came off a global pandemic. People, whether you agree with the precautions or not, but people were hurt, scared. If you had a small business, you're worried about your livelihood. You probably still are. Um, you might be concerned about a loved one and their exposure to getting ill, or maybe their exposure was to getting ill. And instead of us coming out of that being united and ready to take on the next big challenge, the general consensus out there is I'm on my own. Nobody's got my back. I can't trust anyone. I'm me and my family, we're on our own. And that's a terrifying prospect in a polity, in an electorate, that you want them engaged. You want them to feel that their voice is heard. And it's one of those things, like, we look at you're right, at the federal level, definitely at the provincial level, we saw that people were just saying, nobody speaks for me. No, nobody talks to what I need and what my concerns are. And when we're stuck with that, you're right, it leaves the door open for charlatans and hucksters to come in and sell us a bill of goods that they have no plan. Like, it's quick and easy solutions, i.e., Pierre Poilievre with his, oh well, we'll switch the currency over to Bitcoin, and that's going to solve all of our economic woes. No, it won't. If anything, it'll probably make the situation far worse. If you've read anything on what Bitcoin's been doing the last week, Lord help us. But again, it's this: we need big ideas again, and the era of let's just undersell, overperform is over. You need to take a chance, and you need to come up with a plan, and by God, you need to make it work. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think people. I mean, the one thing that got me excited at this election, the one policy, and not necessarily the party that brought it forward, but the policy, was the mental health component of the NDP's platform. I thought it was like, okay, that's a big that grabs my attention. That's something that affects nearly every family in one way or another. And they announced it a month or so before the election, and then they never talked about it again.
yeah.
And it's like, why are you using that as like a big selling point? And you know, coming back Layman's comment about basically we're too left wing. I don't.
Can I just jump in? Can I just jump in on that? Whenever I hear that, whenever I hear liberals say, "Oh, we went too left wing, we're too left," I'm like, then why do you run for them?
Well, yeah,
Like if they're too left wing for your sensibilities, why did you sign up to run for them?
and if you look at the candidates, I mean, to an extent, if you look at candidates like former mayors, like Layman, um, uh, people like Jason Farr and Hamilton, if you're saying that a left wing party is choosing Jason Farr to be its candidate, then sorry, I don't believe you. That is not a left wing message that was being given. This is like the poster child for let's kick homeless people in the nuts. It's metaphorically. I'm not saying he
Yeah,
actually said that, but he's been the poster boy for let's be really unpleasant to homeless people,
yeah.
and that's not a left wing thing. The people they were choosing were right. People associated with at best center right kind of ideas, and you know, it just and I can't come back. It's like you can be as rude about Kathleen Wynne as you want, and you can say, well, she ultimately caused a disaster, and the current liberal mess happened because she lost an election in cataclysmic fashion. But the last Liberal leader to win a majority mandate was Kathleen Wynne at an election where she knowingly
We're supposed
and
to lose.
clearly pivoted to the left of the NDP, who were in the process of trying to go right because they thought that going right was the way to form a government.
Yeah.
And she said, no, 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 we'll go left. We'll do basic income. We'll do, you know, you know, we'll have bold policies about green energy and cap and trade, and by God, she won a majority unexpectedly at a time when people were predicting then that the Liberals were about to, head into into nothing, and it was because she ran very clearly on distinctive policies.
I would just say you need the Liberals going forward. Focus on what people need. Don't worry about left or right policies. Focus on what they need because we're going to enter into 4 years of the current government just does not like doing stuff. They do not like to implement plans unless they absolutely have to. So I would expect a lot, as we said, a lot of fights, a lot of bickering and whatnot.
Ultimately, yeah, actually, I mean, and it's a good point that ultimately Doug Ford has made a virtue out of his complete lack of principle. That he isn't a right wing. He's not a Pierre Polyev. He's not
No.
A religious
No,
bigot. He may be the leader of a party that contains a bunch
but
of
he
them,
doesn't.
but he
But he doesn't
himself
like.
is not.
He's lazy. He doesn't want to do the work, and he's not. And he's just not smart enough to come up
But
with the big
that
ideas.
appeals to a certain number of people. That well, at
Maybe.
least he'll leave us alone, and he's not the first government to sort of basically say, we'll be the ones who do the least. So there's something to that, and insofar as the guy is any two-term leader is a success. It's kind of that lack of
Mhm.
and the lack of things you can really point at that makes them somewhat electable. I just think there's also a huge contingent of people who are looking for something, and insofar as they get anything, they get that from the Conservatives more as well. That it's like what the Conservatives stand for. What do the Liberals stand for these days? What is what makes
We
a
shall.
Liberal?
We shall see. I see we're coming up on our time for this episode, folks. So thanks very much for listening to us rant as we often do. We'll be back on Tuesday. Take care.
All right.